With her husband, Tom, our next storyteller tonight moved from Milwaukee to Cincinnati a year ago. Having moved during the pandemic, she still hasn't found her way around Cincinnati. For example, tonight is her first night in Memorial Hall. She is not a lawyer. I think she has to say that for legal reasons, because she also says she works in a law firm by day and spends her evenings writing and performing, an activity that she loves and she started 10 years ago when she was trying to overcome her fear of public speaking, which led her to taking improv classes, which led her to stand-up comedy, and now storytelling. Please welcome Julie Cole.
Good evening. My story takes us back to May 1983, when I was a junior at Ohio State. It was a Saturday morning, 9 a.m., when I heard one of my sorority sisters screaming my name down the hallway. Now remember, in 1983, when we didn't have cell phones, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, they had to call a general house number, somebody had to find you, and then you talked to a phone attached to a wall. As I picked up the receiver, I could hear the familiar voice of my best friend, Bridget. "Doug just canceled," she said, irritated. I was still waking up, but quickly grasped the urgency of this situation. This was her very last sorority date party. They were to canoe down the Little Miami, and she had asked Doug, who had agreed to accompany her, but now she was dateless. And in 1983, at least in sororities in the Midwest, if you didn't have a male date, you didn't go. We sat for the next 10 minutes just thinking of what kind of prospects she might have, who could fill in. None of them were reliable. But I should probably explain a little bit how we became best friends. We were both dating the same guy and realized we liked each other better than him. Not a romantic like, but a kindred spirit like. Even though we met before the movie Thelma and Louise, afterwards people would use the term to describe us. So we were sitting there figuring, what are we gonna do? I guess she just can't go. And then she blurted out, "Well, you can be my date." We're like, wow, that's pretty scandalous. I mean, thankfully now we have same-sex marriage, kids can take whoever they want to the prom. 1983, it was different. And she's like, seriously, what are they gonna do? Throw me out? I graduate next month. I said, okay, I'm in, but on one condition. We must make a complete mockery out of the whole thing. It's the only way it's gonna work, if they think we're silly, not serious. So, with an hour left before the bus arrived, we skipped showers, makeup, and we focused on our outfits. We found old t-shirts and ripped them up and got a red Sharpie marker and wrote, "Screw conformity" on the front. And then put on men's boxer shorts and tied bandanas around our head. We were ready to roll. We arrived in front of the sorority house just as the bus was getting there. And there was just a flock of preppy girls and their equally preppy dates standing on the lawn, with Izod collar shirts turned up and perfectly pressed chinos. Bridget and I grabbed the beer from the back seat, and she yelled at the crowd, "Meet my date, Julie." I gave a bow, and we got a respectable round of applause. But we still had a hurdle. The chapter president, Missy, a tall woman with a bouncy ponytail and a clipboard, was checking off couples as they wanted to get on the bus. She looked at me and rolled her eyes and she said, "You're Doug?" And I said, "Today I am." And then she glared at Bridget and she said, "I should have expected this from you." You see, Bridget and I like the camaraderie of sorority life, but not all the rules. But once on the bus, we were emboldened. We headed straight to the back. 15 minutes into the ride, it's quiet. It's boring. I looked at her, she looked at me. Without saying a word, we broke into song. Green Acres is the place to be. Farm living is the life for me. Land land spreading out so far and wide. Keep Manhattan, just give me that countryside. And then we followed it with Gilligan's Island and the Brady Bunch. And we had unintentionally polarized the bus. Half of them thought we were heroes and were singing along, and the other half thought we were idiots, and they were both right. But 3 warm beers and a bumpy bus ride later, we arrived at the canoe livery. Everyone started scattering as the manager, Hank, began screaming orders at people. Sign the liability release, pick out your canoe, get a life jacket, secure your supplies. Supplies? Did we need supplies? He then went into the explicit safety instructions that are required when you take an 11-mile canoe trip. But Bridget was really focused on opening another beer, and the pop and then fizz distracted the crowd and annoyed Hank. He came over to us and just got in our face and he said, "You need life jackets." And I tilted my head and kind of flaunted my screw conformity shirt, and I said, "No, really, does a life jacket go with this outfit?" And he said, "No life jacket, no canoe." So Bridget and I realized we needed to comply, and we did in the most resistant way possible. We walked over to the rack of life jackets, looked at our options, and reached for the infant life jackets and put it around our neck the way that people put neck supports as they're going onto the airplane. So that's when we strutted out onto the dock, and our glory ended. As we got into the canoe, our feet unsteady, and it started to sway, we realized one inconvenient truth. Neither of us had ever really been canoeing before. I hadn't. She had once with a guy who did most of the paddling and the navigation, but there was no turning back now. Since she had a little bit of sailing experience, she took the stern, I took the bow. I just felt so dizzy. I was like, is it the canoe? Is it my beer-filled brain? But we launched. We felt victorious, but only for 100 yards. We ran into a bridge abutment. The canoe tipped. We tumbled into the cold water. The good news, it was still shallow enough that we could empty the canoe. The bad news, Missy and her date and the ones that thought we were idiots were really close by, and they just were laughing and pointing at us. We had lost half of our beer in Bridget's left shoe, but we quickly got back in, wanting to regain our rebel status. We remembered that Hank guy saying something about the trip taking 3.5 hours, and we were like, we can do this quicker. I mean, our main motivation at this point was food. In our haste to get to the bus, we had skipped breakfast and lunch. We were starving. So we began paddling faster. Over the next 6 hours, our canoe tipped 10 more times. Tip 2, Bridget lost her other shoe. She dove in to find it, and I was just staring at the surface, waiting for her to reappear. And it felt like minutes were passing by, and she didn't, and I was so worried that she was drowning. And I went to dive in after her, and she reemerged, wet, muddy, but still no shoe. Tip 5, I lost my right shoe and my infant life jacket. Tip 7, she was trying to save our one remaining beer, and she lost her infant life jacket. Tip 9, I really had to go to the bathroom, but we couldn't get to shore, so I peed in the river through my boxer shorts. And then tip 10, we lost a paddle. Now, thankfully those things float, but we had to use our hands to get to it to recover it. At this point, we were shaking because we were so cold in our thin, wet clothing. We could tell the sun was getting ready to set, and we didn't have any idea where we were. There was sort of like this little fork to the river. We looked at each other, we rock, paper, scissored it, and decided to go left. By this point in the trip, we had figured out how to paddle together, but we were so exhausted, our arms were so tired that we couldn't. And then suddenly, we heard voices in the distance, and we smelled fire and food. And excited, we began paddling so fast to see our friends. And as we got close to the bank, we didn't see preppy co-eds. We saw 3 big, white, burly men with gray beards that looked like they lived in the woods. We were disappointed it wasn't our group. We thought, well, maybe they can help us with instructions. So I was paddling closer. We're trying to ask them something, and the taller man yelled down, "Hey, darlings, why don't you come up here for some food?" The fire looked warm. The food smelled good. For a split second, we almost did. But out of the blue, running down the bank was another bare-chested man. And he was hooting and hollering, and he said, "Ooh, I smell pussy. Here, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty." It was also at that moment we both swear we heard the banjos from Deliverance strumming in the background. Adrenaline force propelled us. We started paddling as fast as we could away. We looked in the back, and Pussy Man was trying to launch his canoe and come after us. We just kept paddling and paddling and paddling until they were nowhere in sight. Suddenly, we were catching our breath, paddling a little slower. I started to grasp the gravity of our situation. We had nearly drowned, escaped potential rape. It was basically dark. We could hardly see, and we were so cold I couldn't feel my hands or my feet. To make matters worse, now there really was a fork in the river. We just stared at each other. She said, "Didn't that Hank guy say something about the confluence of the Little Miami and the Great Miami?" I was like, "I don't know. I wasn't paying attention." And she goes, "Well, maybe you should have." I said, "Well, maybe you should have had a real date." And then we got upset with each other for getting upset. And we just felt so defeated. You know, we just wanted to get there before the rescue crew had to come out and get us. And she said, "Well, I think we just need to cross it." We thought, well, this is our last hope. We've lost everything but our dignity. Let's give it a try. So we just started fighting the current, fighting our tears. And within like 5 minutes, we saw the flicker of a bonfire, and we heard young voices laughing, and we knew we had made it. As we parked the canoe, we got out. We were shaky, shoeless, soaked, bruised, but I saw a smiling Missy running toward us. And I was like, "Aw, she does have some compassion after all." And she got closer and she said, "Doug, Bridget, I think these are yours," and handed us our infant life jackets back, driving the final nail in our screw conformity coffin. Thank you.